Sicily, 1943. The sun is brutal. At the Biscari Airfield, 75 German and Italian soldiers surrender to the U.S. 45th Infantry Division. Their hands are in the air. They are prisoners of war. Minutes later, 75 men are dead, executed, not by the enemy, but by their American captors. When the U.S. Army investigated, the soldiers responsible gave a chilling defense. They were just following orders. Orders that they claimed came from one of America's most famous generals, George S. Patton. Was this a heat of battle atrocity, or was it a cold-blooded policy from the very top? This is the story of a massacre the Army tried to bury. To find the truth, we must land on the beaches of Sicily. 1943. The war in North Africa has been won. The German Afrika Korps is shattered. For the first time, Allied High Command dares to look at the continent. But before they can strike at the heart of Germany, they must first breach Fortress Europe. And the fortress's designated soft underbelly is the island of Sicily. On the 9th of July, 1943, the Allies launch Operation Husky. At the time, it is the largest amphibious invasion in human history, larger even than the D-Day landings that would follow a year later. This is not a clean fight. The moment the boots hit the sand, the invasion is a brutal, grinding, and desperate affair. And then there is the heat, a suffocating 100-degree Sicilian sun that bakes the dust into the air. It's a heat that breeds misery, dehydration, exhaustion, and rage. The Italian and German defenders are dug in. The fighting is house to house, ridge to ridge. It's a bloody crawl through a landscape that feels as alien as it is hostile. Into this inferno steps the U.S. 45th Infantry Division. They are known as the Thunderbirds, a National Guard unit drawn largely from Oklahoma, Colorado, and the American Southwest. Their shoulder patch, a golden thunderbird, a Native American symbol of power. But for all their training, for all their bravado, they are green. For the vast majority of these men, Sicily is their first taste of combat, their first time seeing an enemy, their first time seeing their friends die, and their first time taking a prisoner. They are untested, and they are under the command of a general who has demanded they be more than just soldiers.
Being a soldier is not enough. He
has demanded they be killers. The 45th Division is about to be forged in the Sicilian fire. But as they push inland, a dark mindset is taking root. A mindset that is being fed from the very top. That blood and guts atmosphere wasn't an accident, it was a policy. And that policy was being hammered into the 45th Infantry Division by one man, their commander, General George S. Patton, Jr. Patton was more than a general. He was a persona, a walking, talking, profane force of nature, old blood and guts. He saw himself as a reincarnated warrior, a man whose only purpose on earth was to wage war. And in the days and weeks leading up to the invasion of Sicily, he made it his personal mission to transform his green troops from American boys into hardened killers. He did this through his most famous and most infamous tool, his speeches. Imagine the scene. Thousands of young GIs, many of whom had never been outside their home state, are gathered in the North African dust. On a stage, Patton stands. Gleaming helmet, riding breeches, those famous pistols. He is to them a living god of war. And he begins to speak. These were not speeches of patriotism. They were not about defending freedom. Patton's speeches were volcanic, profane, and brutal. He was, in effect, reprogramming his men. He'd yell, "Now I want you to remember that your job is not to die for your country. It's to make the other poor dumb bastard die for his. He told them the purpose of an army is one thing and one thing only: to kill men. He screamed at them that they were not to hold ground. Their job was to attack, and keep on attacking. He dehumanized the enemy. He told his men, "We're going to kill those paper-hanging sons of bitches. We're going to rip their guts out and use them to grease the treads of our tanks." This was the blood and guts part. He was giving his men a license for rage. He was telling them that mercy was a weakness. But then, according to dozens of witnesses and soldiers who were there, he crossed a line that separates a hard general from a man ordering a war crime. He began to talk about prisoners. Patton allegedly demanded to know, "What are you to do if they surrender? What if they hold their hands up?" His answer, reported by men who were there, was chilling. "You're to kill them. Do not take prisoners." He even gave them a twisted practical justification. He'd say, "Prisoners just slow you down. They tie up good men who have to guard them. They eat your rations. They're a burden. I want you to get rid of them." Let that sink in. This is not a heat of battle decision. This is a premeditated command. To these untested troops from the 45th Division, this was a mind-altering directive. The Geneva Convention, the rules of war they had been taught, were just thrown out by their own general. The message as the 45th Division boarded their landing craft was unambiguous: no mercy, no prisoners. Leave a trail of blood and guts. This poisonous command was now coursing through the veins of the entire division, and as they landed on the beaches of Sicily, it was only a matter of time before someone decided to follow that order to the letter.
July 14, 1943. The fight for the Biscari Airfield is over. The Thunderbirds of the 45th Division have taken their objective. The blistering Sicilian sun beats down on the exhausted, dust-caked American troops. The adrenaline of the assault is fading, replaced by the grim business of cleaning up the battlefield. And in that lull, the survivors of the attack, dozens of German and Italian soldiers, do what the rules of war say they should. They come out, their hands held high. They drop their weapons. They are, in this moment, no longer combatants. They are prisoners of war. But to the men of the 45th Division, they are simply a burden. And the words of General Patton, "Do not take prisoners," are still ringing in their ears. This is where the policy of blood and guts becomes a reality. It happens not once, but twice, in two separate, horrifying incidents. The first incident involves Captain John T. Compton of the 180th Infantry Regiment. Compton and his men have rounded up approximately 40 prisoners. They've been disarmed and searched. The immediate fight is over. The correct legal procedure is simple: march them to a rear area holding pen for processing. But Compton has a different interpretation of his orders. To him, these 40 men are a problem, a delay. They are, in the words of his general, slowing them down. He doesn't order his men to march the prisoners. He orders them to form a firing squad. The prisoners, dazed from combat, don't understand what's happening until it's too late. There is no trial. There is no warning. There is only the captain's command. In a matter of minutes, 40 unarmed men are dead in the dust. Captain Compton reports to his superiors that the prisoners made an escape attempt and were shot. But even as he says it, he knows, and his men know, they have just committed a massacre. But the day's horror is not over. Elsewhere on the same airfield, on the same day, Sergeant Horace T. West is given a similar problem. West, a non-commissioned officer, is given a group of 37 prisoners, mostly Italian, and a clear legal order: take them to the rear for interrogation, escorted by a handful of other soldiers. West begins to march the column of prisoners, 1 mile, then 2. The heat is oppressive. The prisoners are slow, they are exhausted, and Sergeant West is annoyed. This is a waste of his time. This is a burden. This is not what old blood and guts would want. He halts the column in a secluded, barren field far from the eyes of his commanding officers. He doesn't consult the other guards. He simply makes a decision. He calmly walks over to one of his men and takes his .45 caliber submachine gun, a Tommy gun. He orders the prisoners into a single long line. He walks in front of them from one end to the other, the muzzle of his weapon tracing their terrified faces. And then he opens fire. He doesn't stop until the entire magazine is empty. He reportedly walks back to his stunned men, hands the weapon back, and simply says, "That takes care of that." When he was later found by an officer, Sergeant West freely admitted what he'd done. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't in shock. He was, by all accounts, proud. He believed he had done his duty. He had, after all, just been following orders. In the span of a single afternoon, on a single airfield, 75 surrendered men had been murdered in cold blood by their American captors. This was not war. This was a war crime. And it was so blatant, so shocking, that not even the chaos of an invasion could keep it a secret.
The massacres at Biscari were too blatant, too cold-blooded to be dismissed as the fog of war. They were reported. A division chaplain, Lieutenant Colonel William King, was horrified by the stories he heard from the men. Risking his career, he bypassed his entire chain of command and wrote a detailed report of the atrocities. That report landed on the desk of General Omar Bradley. Bradley was sickened. He called the incidents cold-blooded murder. The U.S. Army, to its credit, did not immediately bury the story. It launched a formal criminal investigation. The two culprits, Captain John T. Compton and Sergeant Horace T. West, were identified, arrested, and charged with premeditated murder under the Articles of War. The Army was going to hold a trial. The cases would be tried separately, but the core of the defense, the only defense, would be identical. And it was a defense that threatened to put the entire American High Command on trial with them. First came the trial of Captain John T. Compton, the officer who had his men form a firing squad for 40 prisoners. His trial was held in Sicily in August 1943. Compton's lawyer didn't deny the killings. He didn't deny they were prisoners. His defense was simple, and it was aimed straight at the top. He argued that Captain Compton was just following orders. Whose orders? General George S. Patton's. The defense argued that Patton's infamous speeches were not suggestions or pep talks. They were the oral command of a superior officer. When Patton screamed, "Do not take prisoners," he meant it. Compton, his lawyer claimed, was an obedient, if perhaps overzealous, officer. He was simply trying to be the kind of ruthless killer his general had demanded he be. He wasn't a murderer. He was a good soldier. The court-martial panel, a group of his fellow officers, listened to this defense. They deliberated, and then they returned with a shocking verdict: not guilty of all charges. Captain John T. Compton was acquitted. He was cleared, his record clean, and he was returned to his unit for active duty. The panel had, in effect, agreed. An officer who followed the spirit of Patton's brutal orders could not be held responsible for murder. But then, there was the case of Sergeant Horace T. West. This was the man who had personally and methodically machine-gunned 37 surrendered prisoners in a field. His trial followed Compton's, and his defense? Exactly the same. He too had heard the speeches. He too believed he was carrying out the will of General Patton. He too was just following orders. But this time, the court-martial panel reacted differently. Maybe it was the personal, hands-on nature of the crime, a machine gun in the hands of one man, not a disciplined firing squad. Maybe it was the clear difference in rank. The court found Sergeant Horace T. West guilty of willful and premeditated murder. His sentence, life in prison. And this is the dark, contradictory heart of the Biscari trials. Let's review the file. 2 men, 1 airfield,
The same day, the same crime, the execution of unarmed prisoners of war, the same defense. I was following Patton's orders. One man, the captain, walks free without a stain on his record. The other, the sergeant, is sentenced to life imprisonment. Why? Why the wildly different verdicts? Was it truly about how they killed? An orderly execution by an officer versus a messy one by an NCO? Or was it about rank? Was it a simple, cynical case of the officers' club protecting its own? Was Captain Compton too respectable to be a murderer, while Sergeant West was the perfect low-ranking scapegoat the Army needed to prove that justice had been done? The Army had its conviction, but the man who gave the order and the officer who followed it were still free.
The Biscari trials were over. The Army had its verdicts. An officer acquitted, an enlisted man convicted. But for the investigators, the case was not closed. The contradictory verdicts only pointed to a deeper, more systemic problem. Captain Compton's defense, "I was following Patton's orders," had been accepted by a military court. This was an explosive legal precedent. It meant that, officially, the Army had just agreed that General Patton had ordered a war crime. This investigation now had to move up the chain. General Omar Bradley, horrified by the whole affair, forwarded his findings to the one man who stood above Patton, the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower was now in an impossible position. He was in the middle of a brutal campaign, and his most effective, most aggressive, and most famous battlefield commander had just been credibly accused of inciting a massacre. An official investigator was dispatched to confront Patton himself. This was not a friendly visit. This was a formal investigation. The investigator asked Patton point blank, "Did you tell your men to take no prisoners?" Patton was not apologetic. He was furious, not at the massacre, but at the investigation itself. He saw it as a trivial complaint, a distraction from the real business of killing. He recorded the confrontation in his personal diary. He wrote that he told the investigator that any officer who thought the speeches were an order to murder prisoners was, in Patton's words, a goddamn fool. He went on, writing in his diary that he was certain that the men who are trying to make a fuss over this are, in Patton's words, a certain type of Jews. He showed zero remorse. To Patton, the real crime wasn't the massacre, it was getting caught. Eisenhower read the report. He was appalled by Patton's attitude. He sent Patton a scathing secret letter. He reprimanded him, writing, "I am well aware of the necessity for hardness, but this does not excuse cold-blooded murder." But that was it, a secret letter, a slap on the wrist. Why? Because Patton, the son of a bitch, was his son of a bitch. Eisenhower needed him to win the war. He could not afford to put old blood and guts on trial. So, General Patton was protected. The Army's most valuable and most guilty general was quietly shielded from all consequences. But this created a new, ugly problem. Justice had to be done, or at least it had to look like it was done. Captain Compton was already free. General Patton was untouchable. That left Sergeant Horace T. West. West was the perfect scapegoat. He was low-ranking, he had no powerful friends, and his crime was undeniably brutal. His conviction was the Army's proof that it had handled the problem. So, Sergeant Horace T. West was shipped off to a military prison in North Africa to serve out his life sentence, the lone example that the U.S. Army does punish its own. Except, that's not what happened. The paper trail on Sergeant West goes cold, and then it reappears with the most cynical twist in this entire story. His life sentence lasted just 1 year. In November 1944, his sentence was quietly overturned on grounds of clemency. He was deemed rehabilitated and was immediately released from prison. But the Army didn't just let him go. they did something even more unbelievable. They returned him to active duty. They gave him a rifle and sent him right back to fight in the war. And after Germany surrendered, Sergeant Horace T. West, the man who personally machine-gunned 37 unarmed prisoners, received an honorable discharge from the United States Army. This was the real cover-up, the acquittal of Compton, the secret reprimand of Patton, and the quiet, cynical pardon of the only man they convicted. The entire set of trials was a show, a piece of legal theater to make a public relations nightmare simply go away.
So, let's review the final tally, the verdict of history on the Biscari Massacre. 75 unarmed prisoners of war executed in cold blood. Captain John T. Compton, who ordered a firing squad, acquitted. General George S. Patton, who gave the incendiary speeches, secretly reprimanded. Sergeant Horace T. West, who pulled the trigger, convicted, sentenced to life, then quietly pardoned and honorably discharged. This was the justice of war. It was a cynical piece of theater, a legal farce. The Army investigation proved to be nothing more than a damage control operation. Why? Why was this clear-cut war crime swept under the rug? Because the U.S. Army had an unbeatable general, an aggressive war winner in George S. Patton, and they believed they needed him to win. In the brutal calculus of a world war, you cannot put your star player on the bench. You cannot put your war winner on trial. The necessity of victory was deemed more important than the justice for 75 murdered men. And that is what makes the Biscari case so much more disturbing than a simple individual crime. Our last file, the case of Edward Leonsky, the Brownout Strangler, was the story of a lone madman, a sickness within the ranks. The military justice system in that case worked. It identified the sickness and it cut it out. But Biscari? Biscari was a sickness in the system itself. This wasn't an anomaly, it was a policy. The killings were not the act of a single twisted mind. They were the predictable, almost inevitable result of a command structure that encouraged brutality and dehumanized the enemy. This case file lays bare a terrifying truth about war. It asks the question, how thin is the line between a soldier and a killer? What is the difference between an act of war and murder? The Biscari file gives us the chilling answer. The line is permission. The line is a single fiery speech from a general on a stage. The line is the unspoken nod from a superior officer. The line is the belief that the rules are for the other guy and that your side is justified in doing whatever it takes. The line between soldier and killer isn't a physical one, it's a moral one. And at Biscari, it was erased by a single order. The Biscari Massacre wasn't a secret. It was a failure of command, from the bottom all the way to the top. A story not about a monster hiding in the shadows, but about the darkness that can be created in plain sight just by giving it a uniform and an order. A story found only in the court-martial files. Thank you for joining us in the archives. If you believe these hidden stories need to be told, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing to the court-martial files. It is the best way to ensure these chapters of history are not forgotten. What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments below.